We're back on Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. This morning we're talking cooking with Chef Frank Cutrara, and Darlene Shaw's come along because she's actually done the cooking classes and things at the cooking social. That's a nice thing. That sounds like
social.
You know, people get together and they're chatting and they're cooking. It's a really fun thing. It reminds you of your grandmother's kitchen years ago when everybody used to come over and help. And
it is a fun thing. It's you know, you see the people congregate and they start off with cocktails and they make their way into the kitchen slowly, and there's a big butcher block and everybody's, you know, surrounding that, and whether they're participating, whether they're watching, there's the chatter. There's just such a nice vibe.
They're always curious.
They are
for
curious.
Sure. Or overwhelmed with the beauty of the kitchen itself and the home, because the home, it has a soul. You could feel it as soon as you walk into it. The people, it's like putting a pair of slippers on in a house coat. It just embraces you.
Well, you also do all those little touches. When you walk in there, there's beautiful candles lit, and there's a warmth,
fireplace
and there's
in the wintertime.
You know, just wonderful seasonal decorations. And I would say you really go above and beyond to nail those elements, and that
thank you.
Encompasses the whole experience.
We want to leave an impression, so it's in all the detail for sure.
You have 12 to 18 people. You got one heck of a big kitchen.
It's 550 square feet. So yes, that's big for a kitchen home for sure. But it was a garage that held 3 cars, and now it's hard to believe it's a kitchen space.
So you really park on the road?
Yeah. Yeah, I park on the road. No, I have a little driveway you get 3 cars on. Yeah.
Wow. That's a big space for a kitchen. But kind of like the old farm kitchens, right?
Yeah, half of it's just for dining, and the other half is the working part, the island, and then the fridge and the one stove. It's not over the top in equipment. It's very, very humble, actually. Just a modest little kitchen. Lots of pots and pans. People are overwhelmed with the overhead pots and pans that I have. And they come in copper, and they come in stainless steel and cast iron.
Okay, well, that was our next topic here is tools of the trade, because that's a big thing with cooking. I always use the analogy when people talk about the number of knives I have in my kitchen or the number of potato peelers or whatever. I figure many hands make light work, first of all. And if you're a carpenter, you don't just have one screwdriver and hope to God it fits everything you do, because that just doesn't work. So it's almost like, think of a carpenter, now think of a chef. You have to have the right tool for the right job.
Yes, true. But it doesn't have to be excessive.
No.
Either. A lot of kitchen gadgets are based solely for a single purpose.
Right.
I could get away with my knife and use and not have to sort of depend on those gadgets so much, and just with knife techniques and sort of.
You would peel a potato with a knife?
No, I wouldn't. I use a potato peeler, but I use a swivel potato peeler.
Oh, what's that?
So the swivel head it basically follows the contour of when you put the blade onto the potato and run it down a carrot or a potato, it'll follow the contour of the potato, so that it just makes it easier, as opposed to there's like blade peelers that just have a blade and you just carve away basically. So a swivel one is the better way to go. OXO makes excellent swivel potato
that's
peelers.
Neat. I'm making a Christmas stocking list.
Yeah, for
OXO
$12,
swivel.
$13 or whatever it is. It's I've had mine for years. I've got 2 of them and they work wonderful. So yeah, we don't get too much into gadgets, but as far as knives go, again, I'm not excessive when it comes to knives. A sharp knife is really imperative. As long as you keep a knife sharp, it doesn't have to be great quality. You don't have to spend a lot of money on knives.
What do you consider a lot of money? You know, $5 over at the grocery store?
Okay, well, my chef knives, 10-inch, 12-inch, common sizes, they're all under $150. That's pretty inexpensive.
Yeah, because you can spend a fortune.
You could spend $40, $60 on a knife. I spend under $200. You could spend $700 to $1,000 on a Japanese blade knife.
Yikes! And what do you get for that?
I don't know. I've never used one, so I don't. I'm very practical when it comes to things, and I find I've got a couple Japanese knives that my friend has gotten for me, because I don't he's done research on it, and he introduced me to those, and I've had them, and they'll last forever. They'll last for a long, long, long time before I need to get rid of them. And the same that goes with my pots and pans too. I haven't bought a pot or a pan in over 20 years.
So you bought good ones to begin with.
You buy good ones to begin with. If you can buy stainless steel, 1810 is what you're going for. That's a grading of how much chromium and nickel are in the pot, and they're usually heavy based, and they're that type of pot and pan that will outlive you, basically. Cast iron you can go with. I bought copper at one day at sorry, I forget the name of the place. It was just they were out for $30 each, and they were just trying to get rid of them. And these are normally $300 pots.
Wow.
They're really heavy based. And,
right place, right time. Wow.
Right place, right time. And I went back, and it was the IKEA commercial, like start the car, kind of idea. I couldn't believe they were giving this away. They didn't have lids. That was why they were selling for so little.
But you can get a universal lid that you can use on almost any pot.
Exactly. The lids are
the least of your worries.
The least of your worries. Yeah.
Wow.
So they do amazing things to food. They really do. I could see the difference in the cooking method as far as how they hold heat.
So that's why you would use copper versus stainless steel.
Yeah, in France, everyone uses, in a top kitchen, they all use copper. All top kitchens would use copper, and it's outrageously expensive. But I could see why, because they really hold their heat really, really well, very even. It's very hard to burn things in copper because the heat is so evenly distributed, and they're lovely. They're really fun, and it's just like, if you got a good equipment, knives, pots, pans, it just makes the whole cooking experience a whole lot more fun.
Okay.
A sharp knife is is much more fun to cut carrots with or whatever than with a dull knife where it's hazardous and dangerous.
I was telling you about those
work.
cheap knives that I bought. I bought a set of cheap, colorful knives for the cottage, and the logic was, it's just the cottage. Oddly enough, I actually do 10 times more cooking at the cottage than I do at home because I'm always having guests. We're always having people over. There's a lot of cooking to be done. And I'm in a hurry because I want to get back out to the beach. I don't want to spend my whole day inside cooking. And I've had 2 of the worst cuts I've ever had in my life from that cheap set of knives,
there
which
you go,
is
people.
going
don't
to
buy
be...
cheap knives.
I was going to go and give it away to the secondhand store, and I'm actually going to put it in the dump because nobody should be using it. They're awful. They're just awful. The knife literally bounced off the cutting board, and I was pushing down on it at the time, so it went into my finger and through a joint, and it was a nasty one. And it's never happened to me. I do this all the time. I cook every day of my life, so it had to be the knife fault.
Yeah,
it really did.
Yeah,
in that,
what
in
you
that
get
instant.
for $30. Yeah, 10 knives are $30. I think you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole set?
Yeah.
I know those knives, the colorful handles. I absolutely know what you're talking
They look
about.
so pretty, don't they?
They are pretty, but they're not practical.
No, they aren't, and they're not a good tool. Yes, not something I would use again. Okay, so we had a question from Susan in Aurora, and she was wondering about non-stick frying pans. She said she tried to go stainless steel, and everything just stuck to this pan. She bought one at Winners or something because she got the really good pan supposedly for a really good price. And she said everything stuck and she hated it, so she's back to using non-stick. But then you hear from all the holistic health people that the non-stick coatings are bad for you, so she's really torn and would like to know your opinion on non-stick frying pans.
Well, I use Teflon. Tefal I find quite good. I've tried, because Teflon every year or so I have to buy a new pan.
Yeah.
Because they die and they start sticking after a certain time. Tefal I find to be quite a good product. They last a lot longer. I tried some of the granite. They're like grain stone
rock pans or something,
and they stuck like crazy. I don't know where the test kitchen was in that industry, manufacturer rather, but bad luck there. Again, copper doesn't stick. I have a wonderful frying pan, but I don't recommend that so much because it's a $300 pan that I got for $30
without a lid. But then who cares?
With a lid, who needs a lid with a frying pan for the most part? But I don't know. Non-stick. And I only use that for pretty much egg cooking and maybe fish. Sometimes fish if I'm not using cast iron for. If I want a good sear, I'll use cast iron. Cast iron is again, you can get your pan so that you can make it pretty non-stick. As long as you keep it seasoned, it can do the job.
So what do you mean by seasoning it?
Well, you gotta, when you first buy a cast iron pan, you have to heat it, wash it, and then you heat it and temper it on the stove, and in the oven you spread it with a thin film of oil, both top and bottom, handle everything. Does
it matter what kind of oil?
A cooking oil, of course. You need some type
like
of cooking oil, canola or
a
vegetable, something. Yeah, it's something food worthy. Crisco oil. A lot of people use Crisco, so it's not as sticky as cooking oil. But YouTube has all kinds of information on how to cure a cast iron pan, and I recommend anyone to go to YouTube and sort of just punch that in, because there's all kinds of demonstrations on how to do that.
And then once you've seasoned it, it becomes virtually nonstick?
Pretty much, yes. Yeah, as long as you don't scrape the bottom and you don't scrape that surface that you create. That with the oil, the Crisco creates almost like a Teflon surface, and as long as that's intact, you're pretty good to go. I've had cast iron pans for 25 years now, and I haven't had to re-season them in that time. Yeah, they work really well.
So it's not something that you have to do every time you wash it?
No, you wash it with warm water and a light scouring pad, but you can't get that. It's like Teflon almost. You got to make sure you don't scrape that oil that you baked into it on. Once that's off, then you have to re-season it again and sort of go through the whole preliminary
process over again.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Well, it's time for another little break, and we're going to take just a little break because we got more to talk about. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to Fresh Waves.
Hi folks, Kim Mitchell here. However you choose to get around, your ATV, your snowmobile, your boat, car, if you have a motorcycle, all these things take 100% of your attention and skill to operate safely. Alcohol impairs that, and bad things can happen. So, be smart, okay? You know what I'm going to say next.
This message brought to you from the Safe and Sober Awareness Committee.
We're back on Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. We're talking with Frank Cutrara and Darlene Shaw today about cooking. So we did have a question from one of our listeners about spices, but before we start on the spices, let's talk about oils. Because oils are kind of a tricky thing. The health food industry right now, of the holistic health food industry, is saying you should only ever have 3 oils in your house: avocado oil, coconut oil, and organic butter. The rest of them all flip. They turn to a trans fat when you're cooking with them, so don't do it. Other people are now saying, 90% of the olive oil on the shelves in the grocery stores is not really olive oil. There's all kinds of nonsense around oils. So what do we do with oils?
Well, I think we have a hard time choosing an oil. Everyone's under the assumption that olive oil is the only end-all, be-all of oils to cook with and to eat. I always have a big selection of oils. I have probably about 6 oils at any given time.
Really?
Yeah, peanut oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, sunflower oil. And then I do some seasoned oils that are sunflower-based with garlic and chilies and things like that. So
that sounds lovely.
And that just makes cooking more fun. And that spills over into vinegars too. I always have at least 5 different vinegars in my selection of vinegars. And a lot of people are bent on the fact that it has to. When do you use raspberry vinegar, or when do you use a sherry vinegar? And it's not that. It's not that complicated. It's just what your mouth decides it wants to eat that day.
What tastes good.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't know that on vinegar bottles there's an acidic percentage on the label. A lot of European, like sherry vinegars, white wine vinegars, red wine vinegars, usually have a percentage somewhere between 5 to 7% acid. Rice vinegar is 4%. If I want something mild in a vinegar without overpowering, I'll go to a rice vinegar, which is quite discreet. And or you would cut back on the 7% acid vinegar, so that if you're doing, a dressing or something, a 1-to-3 ratio, you have to be aware of the acid content, because sometimes you might need a little more oil because it might be a little too sharp, so you have to tone it down a bit. So that's a good piece of information that a lot of people aren't aware of.
What's your 1-to-3 ratio?
A 1-to-3 if you're doing a basic vinaigrette. One part vinegar to 3 parts oil is the common ratio, the starting point of a vinaigrette. Then whatever else you put into that is wholly decided on your mood and your
taste buds at the time.
Your taste buds of the day, yeah.
Yeah.
And oils you should be a little more varied with your oils also, and it's the same thing. It's the same principle. I use sunflower oil as my base cooking oil for the most part, 90% of the time. I like it because it's cleaner than vegetable. I like the flavor of it. It's very nice in salads. I use avocado oil if I'm searing on high, if I'm doing proteins, especially with meats and cast iron. I want to get a good sear, a good color. I'll use avocado because it has a very, very high smoking point. I never really cook with olive oil. If I'm doing Italian vegetable, and I'm using a moderate heat, I'll cook in an extra virgin olive oil just briefly, just to warm things through. But for the most part, I finish with olive oil for that flavor profile without destroying it. So once you take a good extra virgin olive oil and you put it into a heated pan, you're basically destroying what you're paying for.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense.
It doesn't.
No. Okay, so the other question that we had from a listener, and we're running out of time here because, boy, an hour goes by really fast, doesn't it? They were asking about spices. Sometimes people just go a little crazy with spices, and they put a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of this and a bit of that, and there are conflicting flavors sometimes.
Yes. What happens is they're muscling the food. That's referred to as muscling the food, where a lot of people muscle the food with too much garlic. It's subjective, I guess, but at the same point, it could be overused because it becomes something that they use as a crutch almost to make food taste better. Or salt, it falls into that category also. Salt. And I cook with salt all the time, but you don't want it to be salty. You don't want food to be salty. It just brings out the flavor. Now with spices, it's the same thing. Spices versus herbs are the two different categories. The herbs are fresh herbs like parsley, thyme, coriander. Usually you finish a dish with sprinkling of herbs just near the end so that they're nice and perfumey and fragrant. And with spices, they provide more of a punch. And they usually have to be cooked in the oil and toasted out and cooked out a bit before, just to release their flavors.
Right.
But if you start adding too many spices, you can basically you start losing the main feature on your plate. If it's a meat of some kind, if it's a stew of some kind, you could start crowding the flavor of that particular element that you have to start with, and you don't. You want to always feature that element and sort of enhance it with spices. So that's just a
general guideline.
Muscling.
And what about the fresh versus dried?
Yes.
If a recipe calls for fresh and you don't have fresh, can you put in the dried stuff?
I don't recommend it. Dried, again, really comes up and punches you in the face compared to fresh. And I think in terms of like thyme is relatively strong, but when it's dried, it's really intense. Rosemary also is very intense. Makes a very strong statement. So does fresh rosemary. Every herb has its own little profile. Basil is quite pungent if it's overused also. You have to use that sparingly. But a lot of people are under the misconception that, to get flavor out of their food, they put lots of something into it. And that's common. I see that a lot as a problem in the kitchen. You don't have to muscle your food so much. You just if you
let
handle
the
food,
taste like a steak.
Yeah, absolutely. You want a steak to taste like a steak with some little perfume to it of some kind, and make sure that that's not taking over, not competing with the main item.
Okay, I bought I have an herb garden, and this year I bought lemon thyme.
Yes.
And I thought, what a cute little thing. It's going to have this. When you brush your hand over it, it's so lemon
Strong.
smelling, you can't even taste the thyme. Mm-hmm. It's a disaster. Well, it's a disaster because I was looking for thyme and I should have just done regular
I
thyme.
prefer fresh, just regular thyme.
Yep, that's
as
what I'll
opposed
do
to
next
lemon
year.
thyme, because I find it's a little conflicting. But that's just personal. I think you just have to sort of go through it and find yourself in the kitchen, test it, and take note and be cognitive to what you're doing and how much you're adding and all those kind of things. So
Yeah.
cooking skills are really important.
It's a bit
that
tricky
way.
because you don't want to overwhelm something, or, just because I have it in the garden, I have to be careful of myself sometimes.
And you have so much of it in the garden,
don't
so
stick
you
the
could use a big
tarragon
handful
inside
of
the
it.
turkey because it really doesn't taste that great. Tarragon and turkey is just not. They begin with T, both of them, but they really shouldn't be
Stay
in the
away
same
from those
dish.
tea spices.
So we are coming up on Thanksgiving, and then of course there's the holiday season and all the rest of it that's coming up. Have you got some tips about cooking a turkey dinner that you could pass on to the listeners, other than don't overdo it?
One tip, I guess, when cooking turkey, I find brining very efficient to keep a nice moist turkey.
So how do you do that?
Well, you use the equilibrium system that I use, which is 2% salt to the water. So you take the amount of water that you're going to brine the turkey with and the weight of the turkey itself. And you need a scale for that. This is what makes this kind of complicated, but the advantage is that you can't over brine your turkey with this percentage. If you have a scale, you weigh out your turkey, you weigh out your water that enough to cover the turkey, and then you use 2% salt ratio to that amount. And that's in that way you could leave it in the brine overnight and not have to worry about it being too briny or too salty. And then you're good to go once you go.
So you actually
put
soak
that
it in
the
water
oven.
overnight?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh.
There's
that's
a
interesting.
scientific thing that happens, and I don't know how to explain it, but
But it happens when
It
you
works.
put salt in the water and you put it overnight.
and it makes it really, really juicy. Yep, and then you roast it 300 degrees for as long as you get to it, basically to a core temperature of about 160 or so, and then remove it. I think again, a lot of people have a tendency to sort of overcook turkey. They want to make sure it's cooked, and so they leave it in too long, and then
Dry
just
turkey.
guess and hope and cross your fingers that it's going to work out. And the other thing that's really vital when you're roasting anything, and not just turkey, but a large portion of meat, a pork loin or a roast beef, is to let it sit for at least an hour before you slice it.
An hour?
Oh yeah, because these hold the
Wow.
heat for a long period of time. Turkey holds its heat for a long period of time.
Okay.
It shouldn't be hot. It just needs to be about 100, 110 degrees or so in temperature, just warm. But it gives it that chance to sort of relax, and all the juices stay in. You never want to cut something that comes out of the oven right away, because all the juices run out. And the meat is like a muscle, so it seizes up. It's coming out of the oven all tight. And then, you give it time and it sort of relaxes and the muscles relax.
okay.
It's a big muscle is what it is.
So should you cover it with something when you
No,
are
you don't have
relaxing
to.
it?
No, it's not necessary to tent it. Just let it sit for, depending on how much weight it is. Like, a prime rib will be 24, 25 pounds.
Turkeys
That'll
are
hold
the
its
same.
heat forever. Yes. So, yeah, that's a common error I see with most people. They don't understand the resting time. The resting time really gives it the good eating quality
Mm-hmm.
for the most part.
And it's also a convenience thing if you've one oven and you got a whole bunch of things to
absolutely.
cook. Get the turkey out of the oven
Get the
and
turkey
then
out
use
and
it.
put your potatoes in or your
Yeah.
squash in, and
Yeah.
in an hour or so they'll be cooked and everything will be timed perfectly. There you go. We're back to the circle.
Yeah, well, it's funny because in my house it's so funny to watch the turkey thing where they take it. They've got these massive sheets of tin foil. You put it all over top of Tom Turkey because we name him every year. Tom, Teddy, whatever the turkey's name is that year.
Starts with a T though.
And then there's turkey towels that are only used for turkeys, and you get the turkey towels out
I
and you
haven't
wrap
seen
it all
the
in the
turkey
towel so
towels.
it's going to stay nice and hot until
is
it
that
gets
right?
to the table, and
It's like a-
it's like this massive thing on the counter that is
like a
Tom
house
Turkey.
coat for a turkey?
Yeah, it's really
Is
funny.
that right? I
Yeah.
haven't heard of that, no.
Yeah, well, anyway, it's quite the hilarious thing. And some of those things are old wives' tales, and some of them are just funny, and you keep doing them, and you have no idea why you do them. It's just that you see someone else do it year after
Yeah.
year after year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of cooking is by association. Most people, they go into cutting something and they just automatically cut it just like their mother showed them, even though it's not applicable to the certain dish that they're doing. Because that's the other thing, is being cognitive to how you cut things depending on what it's going in or how you're treating it. If it, you know, how you cut carrots going into a salad versus how to cut carrots going into a stew. You want chunky big pieces for stew. For salad, if you were to put a big chunky piece of carrot in, it just works your jawbone down before you get through it. So you do matchstick, where it just, you know, and again, because you've created more surface space on the matchstick carrots, it absorbs the dressing.
Right.
And picks it up a whole lot more and makes it much more succulent. I think just little things like that people need to be more aware of. Techniques.
Yeah, techniques. So if you were doing peas and carrots at Thanksgiving dinner kind of thing, most people do them frozen out of a bag. It's just easier.
And frozen peas are actually excellent.
Yeah, they are.
They are. They're the only frozen vegetable that I would ever recommend. Maybe corn. Corn's not bad either.
Yeah, I freeze my own. I cook up massive batches. We eat 4 cobs out of the 12, and I freeze the rest of it.
Yes.
It's a little labor
I hope
intensive.
it's Reese's corn. Reese's corn is the best around.
I do it. I'm from Reese's all the time.
Yeah.
But it's nice. I find it's really nice to put in the chili in January. It gets this. It has this little pop.
Yep.
Of
the sweet texture,
crunchy, and it just reminds me of summer.
Yep. And who doesn't like to be reminded of summer?
Absolutely. Well, we're out of time. This happens to us every week when we do Fresh Waves. Thank you so much for coming in.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
We had a really terrific time. I could do this for another 2 hours because there's so many questions. If you cook all the time, there's always questions. And it's nice to swap ideas and concepts and things like that. So
thank you, Bren.
I hope our listeners got some good tips coming up to all the cooking that they're going to have to do in the next few weeks. Darlene, thanks for joining us. You just sat there quietly most of the time, but you chimed in with your
promo.
Feedback and promo, right. So if people want to get a hold of you, Frank, how do they get a hold of you?
www.fcutrara.com. Cutrara.com.
Cutrara.
fcutrara.com.
There you go. Okay.
All the information's on the website. The menus, pricing, shots, photos of the home, galleries of people making food. If you spend about 3 or 4 minutes on the website, you have a really good idea of what it's all about.
Okay. Or pop on over to his Facebook and Instagram because there's some great visuals there.
Yes.
You'll be leaving there hungry.
Okay. One question I forgot to ask was a listener was saying, do you do barbecues?
Barbecue menus?
Will you do barbecues?
I don't. I'm not allowed to sort of work outside of my house.
Okay.
That's a bylaw in Stouffville. I did at one time, I was told.
Okay. There you go.
So we're back to the kitchen.
See? Good to know. Thanks again for joining us today.